Greetings, you admirable, you damnable accursed. Herle here, with the three people who make my whole goddamned week. If you watch us on the YouTube machine, you know they're attractive. They're the sharpest political minds of any political podcast, and they're never not ready to put the cuss in disgust. Jordan Leichnitz, Reid, and Kory Teneycke are here with us. Here's the rundown today. Minister Freeland's budget's about a month away. We'll do a first pass here on budget strategy. Our cursed clipping is all the way from Nelson Bennett, reporting in Business in Vancouver, on Poilievre's pointed remarks to corporate Canada. And there are fresh new numbers out from Abacus Data and the good friend of the pod, David Coletto, complete with a couple of polling questions your always humble panel had a wee bit of influence on. We'll break all that down. And then finally, it's the great Mr. Pinsent and our Hey Yous. Kory, Scott, Jordan, I got a story to tell you. I'm out in Winnipeg last week at a convention of Crops Canada and the Canola Producers of Canada. And I'm doing a panel. And before the panel, I'm sitting around having lunch with some of the guys, and they are guys. And they're on the board of directors of these various institutions. And they're also farmers, canola farmers mostly. And they tell me that they went to Ottawa for their recent lobby day. And they had a meeting with the Prime Minister. Okay? And, you know, when they tell me this, I worry about where this conversation is going, obviously. And they tell me that they were blown away by Justin Trudeau. That they could not believe how well briefed he was, both on them and on their issues. They couldn't believe how much time they had with him. And they couldn't believe how smart he was. They were so surprised because they thought he was a dummy. And they were so surprised that he was able to not just pander to them, but engage with them back and forth, debate their issues. Like, they came away really impressed with this guy. You know, it's weird, eh? Like how differently things get communicated through the public's amplification systems.
38 million more people in the room with Justin Trudeau and get them one at a time.
Yeah, well, it doesn't work as a strategy, but
right.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking about last week, Brian Mulroney, and I remember having the same observation made regularly by folks that he wasn't the demon that they thought he was when they met him in person. He was very charming and all the rest. But you got to be good at mass media if you want to be good at this business.
Yeah, I know.
I like stories that go the other way. And people go, God, I thought this person was tremendous, and I met them in real life, and they're a complete.
Well, that's what I
asshole.
normally get. That's normally what I get.
I have a jar on my shelf. I call it the Mike Duffy jar, and whenever I hear one of those stories, I put it in the Mike Duffy jar because for years and years, people are like, "Oh, you work with Mike Duffy? I see you on TV with him. What a wonderful guy!" And I'm like, actually, no, he's a complete fucking prick. But you know, you'll find out sooner or later, and they did.
We all did.
Well, people on TV, Don Newman's the opposite. Well, actually, I think comes across well on TV, but a charming guy in real life.
Very, very, very.
Not as charming as you. You look like a lemon meringue. My God, I wish you were here.
I'm dressed as the Glad Man today. For those listening, white suit with a white shirt. You know, white hair.
And white background. You were blending right in. You could barely be on this podcast.
Right.
How can you tell I'm in Napa?
It's the camouflage of the working people, Kory. That's what it is right there.
If you were any whiter, you would be the curriculum in a United States schoolroom.
Well, when I go suntanning, you can see me from space. It's like like a glimmering diamond on the beach.
All right, kids. Last week, the finance minister announced the budget date, April 16th. This is likely the second last budget for this government, and surely they will be looking at this one and the next one as a package deal. I think the government has two tasks in front of it. Well, maybe they have 75 tasks in front of them, but I'll isolate two tasks in front of them that they have. First of all, I think they need to find a way to take 5 points away from the Conservatives in the relatively near future. Like, this this gap in the polls is just crushing for the Liberals. It means that everything that they do gets interpreted as an act of political desperation rather than principle. Plus, it means they can't raise any money. They can't get any candidates. It's just bad. So they got to get somewhat competitive relatively quickly. So they need to look for things that might shave 5 points off the Conservative total. Then they need a narrative arc that will make sense. If rates come down and the economy starts to grow next year, they need to get in front of that parade so that people attribute the recovery to their actions as a government and they can ride the rebound. So I'm looking for some immediate measures that gain support from marginal Conservative voters, and I'm looking for a communicable economic plan for growth. Scott?
Okay, good. I like that. That sounds good. There are two questions, I guess. Let's take your proposition. Let's assume that would be desirable. One, does that bear any resemblance to what they're going to do or what they even wish to do? Not certain that they think that that's their project. It'd be interesting to know, but it's interesting that we don't know. I think, so that's where I start. I'm not crystal clear on what their project is, what they say and what they believe the budget must do for them, what they're trying to achieve in the budget. And then the second thing is, even if they did package what you've just suggested, will they get heard? I'm really, really, really troubled, and we'll come to this in the polling discussion. I'm really troubled and really concerned that they're at this place where there's nothing they say that penetrates in a positive way. And I don't know what to do about that problem, but it feels like it is the overwhelming lesson of poll after poll after poll and public sentiment after public sentiment. I would say one additional thing, and I'll turn it over to others. In terms of what they're trying to accomplish in this budget, I think that if you heard them talking, if you're a reporter and you're starting to get background briefings, my guess is they're saying, we're going to balance, we're going to balance the need to do this, to invest, while at the same time making certain that we, pinch our pennies where it's wise and never demonstrate. And so I think fundamentally what that means is they're at war with themselves. There is no clear strategy. I don't think that they have unleashed themselves to the ability to say, you know what, we are setting up a persisting dynamic here and narrative where the Conservatives will cut and we will spend and invest in those things that matter, and that these are two competing ways to go forward. I don't think you're going to hear that. And I think as long as they say, well, on the one hand, we must be austere about those things that don't matter, but invest in those things that do, I think they end up saying almost nothing. And even if that's intellectually sound, I don't think it gets them anywhere.
Yeah. Jordan, what's your take?
Yeah, it's going to be a tough one. I mean, I think obviously with two budgets ahead of them, there will be a really strong temptation to make this something of a fill the gaps budget. Just, save the good stuff for the one right ahead of the election. And really, they're fiscally, they're in a bit of a corner as well, right? There's not really any room for increased program spending unless they do something on revenue. There is likely concern about anything that might give the Bank of Canada an excuse to keep rates high, right? I think they don't want to be accused of working at cross interests to the Bank of Canada there. And so that really does tie their hands against doing anything big, which is unfortunate because nobody's listening unless they do something that is significant, surprising, to break this like almost this wall around what the PM and what the ministers are doing. It's going to be really tough to actually connect with Canadians on the budget or on anything else unless you shake things up a little bit. And so, of course, in the context of a budget, that usually requires some money or a very strong and surprising narrative. And we really haven't seen any evidence that they're teeing up the second one. So, I think that it's going to be a challenging one. Maybe on the plus side for them, and inflation also boosts government revenue a bit too, right? So maybe they will have a little bit of room to play there. But again, I think that there's going to be a lot of internal pressure for them just to use that to show that they're going more towards balance, that they're on a responsible fiscal track. And while that will get nods in certain rooms, it's going to do absolutely nothing for their problems that they're facing with Canadians who still have just absolutely sky high anxiety around the economy and affordability.
Hey, Kory, how could they break through with this budget?
they could cancel the planned increases in the carbon tax, because let's just be honest about what they're actually going to do. They're going to increase taxes massively on people who are feeling a huge issue around cost of living. Like not only are they not going to do themselves any favors with this budget, I think they're going to make things immeasurably worse for themselves. And there's no dissuading them from this seemingly politically suicidal course of action that I can see anyway. I know we're going to get into some polling around differences in perceptions of the NDP and Liberals soon. But like some of these other issues that we're talking about, you mentioned they need to have a narrative. Well, Poilievre has a narrative around everything being broken, and I found it very interesting. This past week, Leger did a poll and looked at that, and 3/4 of Canadians agree with him. Like that's I think
it's amazing how successful Poilievre's been at establishing the vocabulary of Canadian politics over the last couple of years.
I think it's a sign of perhaps some good political instincts, but I think also the work of our good friend Brooke Pigott and Dimitri Panagopoulos and others. Like I think there's research that is clearly helping to drive the verbiage that they're using to describe things right now. A lot of voters are very unhappy. A lot of people in Canada are very unhappy right now. They're feeling lots of anxiety. They're feeling at times anger around the situation, and Poilievre is laying out a narrative that is, I think, speaking very clearly and in very easily accessible language as to what that's about and who's to blame. But I think for the Liberals to turn it around, like they need to question some base assumptions, and the most obvious one is the carbon tax. Like, I don't think there's a way to position yourself as being a part of the recovery if the economy does. That's very plausible to begin with, because I think people are going to be renegotiating mortgages at higher rates and locking those in. And, even if the economy recovers, there's nothing that's going to increase their paycheck the 20% that inflation's gone up. Right. So people are going to be financially worse off irrespective. And, you just got to hope that fades over time, I suppose. But I'm not sure there's a lot that they can proactively do in a budget if they're unwilling to change some of those fundamental things that are I think, the cause of people's unhappiness with them. Like they seem like their ears are closed to the cost of living pressures that people are feeling, so much so that they're going to make them immeasurably worse by hiking the carbon tax. So, like I don't see an easy path for them that they're of any sort, but certainly not one that they're willing to actually take.
Right. And shitification. That's fun to say. And shitification, a hell of a word. Word of the year for 2023, according to the American Dialect Society. For those of you who've never heard it before, and shitification refers to the all too common technology phenomenon where the user experience goes to, well, shit, in favor of the tech company maximizing its own revenues and profits. Think about the declining usefulness and endless stream of unwanted ads on Facebook and Insta, and the just plain weird cesspool formerly known as Twitter. Yep, and shitification. But rest assured, Hurley-Burleyites, it has not yet infested every tech company, and it's here that I'll take you back to our presenting sponsor, TELUS. For weeks now, citing specific next-gen network examples in everything from electric and autonomous vehicles to autonomous mining, I've been talking about how TELUS has been reinvesting hundreds of billions of dollars to continually innovate so their technology advances and meets the evolving needs of Canadians. Think of the massive improvements made from 3G to LTE to 5G, or dial-up to DSL to fiber. Because of investments like these, we all get more stuff done in less time, and businesses create and deploy new products and services that end up being better for the end user. Technology that just makes life better? It's the opposite of shitification. Legitification, green litification, big hitification. Are you listening, American Dialect Society? Scott, are you with us in spectral form?
I am, yes. I shut my camera off because I'm having some computer issues.
All right. So would you be tempted to be tacking toward Poilievre and try to minimize some of the things like deficits, etc., that are apparent strengths for him relative to the current government? Or would you be building up a complete alternative thesis to growth from what he has?
Well, I think I would try to do both. And I think that both is, I think if you did both, they lend themselves nicely to one another. And I think, I was asked a few days before the State of the Union what I thought the budget speech should look like. And one of my suggestions would to do what Biden did in the budget speech, in the State of the Union, rather, right? Which was lay out your program, but don't stop there, right? Lay out your program constantly as it is defined in relation to the alternative. So just do that point for point for point, do it in a macro sort of high level way, and then do it right down and each single check the box in a way that advantages you and tries to mobilize your own folks, and then tries to chisel away some of the people that you think are swing. And so I think I would do that. The problem is there are some large pieces of rubble in the road that I think need to be removed before you're going to have much successful doing that. And, one is the carbon tax issue, as Kory has mentioned. It's hard to see how you go forward with that stuck there, but I think you can give it a college try. The other more damning thing, and Kory has mentioned this also, and I hate Kory, so I'm not giving him any credit here. But this fucking Arrive Cam thing, right? And or Arrive Scam or Arrive App or App Scam or whatever the Christ it is, it really is a shot to the gut when you want to set up a dynamic where you say, there's fundamentally two ways that we can move forward. And one is that we're going to invest in the things that matter most, and that means people and education, and we're going to take some big bets on industrial strategy. Or you can say what Pierre Poilievre has been saying all the way back to the pandemic, right? Don't do anything. Don't spend anything. Just, leave it in the hands of individuals, and that won't work. The problem is, and saying that means that he's going to cut. But when you start to make the cut stuff, the rejoinder is so obvious, which is, you know what? There's room to cut. There's room to cut when you don't even know that a goddamn guy who's already a bureaucrat is siphoning millions of dollars in contracts, and it still takes you 6 months to figure out they should actually finally shut down the provision of future contracts to the guy. So that's I sound like all I'm doing is bitching and moaning and kicking at them. But that's the challenge in this, is that I think even the most obvious narrative, which may very well not work, is so obviously undermined given circumstances. So it's no tall, it's no shorter.
Well, and this is the thing these are the things that people judge governments on. I mean, we learned this, Scott, that you can eliminate a $45 billion deficit, but if you blow $50 million on the sponsorship program, you're not good financial managers.
Right. Not what you do, it's why you do it. Right. And I think one of the other things that really strikes me is that, we're a month out now from the budget, and there are some pretty basic communications things that the government's game is still not stepped up on. Like, they need to set up some wins for themselves in the budget, like ask questions that they can favorably answer with the budget, that set a good contrast with the Conservatives. And I do think that you have to make potential Conservative cuts part of the narrative, but you can't be in that half-heartedly, right? There has to be some fight in it. And we're not seeing any of that. Like, once again, actually, we're seeing the NDP doing a better job of setting up some wins that they're going to get in the budget. They're likely to get their school food program. I think that they're probably going to get something on housing, and so they're going out, they're setting up some stuff so that they can have a win and they can fight another day. But this is like really, really basic stuff that we're not actually seeing be communicated out of the government in anything other than gobbledygook language that's not resonating with anybody.
So, Jordan, let's just pick up on what you're saying. So this is called preconditioning, right? It's called preconditioning. So if they're going to have a school food program, and I don't know that they are, I think that's going to be a very popular idea. And I think it's an idea that speaks to affordability for low-income families, and even for some middle-income families, will relieve some of their financial pressure. And it's a wonderful story about children and health and educational outcomes. There's going to be almost no opposition to this idea, but you would want to be. You would want to be
also already voted against the idea, right? So go tell that story.
But you need to talk. What problem is it solving?
Yeah.
Right. That's what you need to do in advance. Is what is the problem that exists out there that I'm going to solve on budget day? Right. And I don't hear that happening.
And there is a compelling story, and you've done many of the interviews with folks who are running food banks who are seeing an unprecedented wave of families with children who don't have enough to eat. Like, we have a real issue. There are great and human and real stories to be told that could actually set up some wins for them, even if this is a fill the gaps budget. But it doesn't, like, that work does not seem to be bubbling to the surface yet, and time is short. And so I don't have a lot of optimism that they're going to be able to sort this out in a way that's ultimately beneficial for them. I think probably they're gonna end up, I think Scott has it right, that they're at war with themselves internally, and the real casualty on that is going to be any form of clear narrative that would provide them with a win on the budget, unless they manage to iron that out in the next week or so.
So our sponsor, CN, wants a few good women, actually more than a few. As you'd probably expect, railroading has been dominated by men for a couple of centuries. It remains so across the industry. But CN knows that women arrive with a different way of doing things, which is to say often a better way. The fact is, women have been a significant part of CN's fabric for a long time, just not always in what the railway calls the running trades, meaning the people who actually operate trains. There's no reason for that, other than that's how it's always been, and it is changing. Anyway, last week, to coincide with International Women's Day, CN brought together a group of women railroaders, stakeholders, and government officials at its training center in Winnipeg, where all new Canadian CN employees begin their jobs. Some of them are daughters and granddaughters of CN railroaders. Some are the first generation of what CN hopes will be a great many women railroaders. They went through simulators and training sessions and a demonstration of a derailment, and all ended up taking a safety pledge. One of their instructors was a woman named Rebecca, who has made it a goal to help recruit women, train them, and check in on them along their career journeys. These women are breaking ground. CN is exceedingly proud of them. Oh, it's worth remembering here that for the first time in Canadian history, a Class 1 railway is being led by a woman, CN's own Tracy Robinson. And yes, indeed, she brought a new way of doing things to the job. All right, Kory, I'm going to move on to our clipping. And I'm going to want your reaction first, actually, to this clipping, which is from a fellow named Nelson Bennett, who writes for Business Intelligence for BC. I found this to be a good account of Poilievre's speech. Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre challenged BC Premier David Eby to cancel the April 1st carbon tax hike at the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade breakfast meeting Friday morning, and scolded business leaders for sucking up to the government when they should be pushing back against policies that are against their own interests. In front of a sold-out audience of 325 Greater Vancouver Board of Trade members Friday, Poilievre sketched out his vision for Canada, a monopoly board of sorts where Canadians will have the opportunity to buy or at least rent a home, and where repeat offenders will go straight to jail without being eligible for bail. My common sense plan to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, stop the crime is a bottom-up free enterprise agenda, not a top-down state capitalism agenda, Poilievre said. Poilievre said industry should not expect a free ride from government, and scolded big resource companies that have not pushed back on policies that are counterproductive to Canada's and their own interests. Resource corporations who've proposed these projects and then sat back and done nothing to convince people of their benefits, they are going to have to stand up and fight, Poilievre said. Frankly, when I meet resource companies, they come to Ottawa and all they do is suck up to the Liberal government. They have no backbone, no courage, and they don't fight for their workers. I want to see corporate leaders actually fighting for their workers and fighting for their paychecks instead of sucking up to the very people who are blocking these jobs. Kory, what's your take on that message? What's it supposed to do and what's it doing?
Well, I think it's a worker-centric narrative, which I think is smart. I think it's part of why Poilievre has had a quite a successful appeal to organized labor on the private sector side. And in fact, I saw him up north of Toronto last week, speaking to a room full of those folks, and really connecting with them. But putting, rather than the companies first, putting the workers first. I think that's something that Conservatives have not done very well in much of my political career. And I think, you're seeing not just Poilievre, you see, Ford and others really making a very deliberate attempt to recast their economic narrative and into one that is focused on people's paychecks and workers and standing next to them in a way that traditionally has been what the NDP has done. And I think that approach is paying dividends. I think there's some other things that are maybe less explicit in those talking points, but that you see Poilievre hinting at or pointing towards, criticism of like the RBC, HSBC, acquisition of HSBC's mortgage business, et cetera, saying, we want to make sure there's competition in that field, and kind of taking shots at this system of oligopolies and cartels that permeates almost every sector in this country, and wanting to have one that's more competitive, that's less corporatist, that's going to be giving better prices and more competition in the market to lower costs for folks. I think that's also smart, in that one of the Achilles heels of Conservatives over time has been a perception that they're too cozy with big business. And I was going to say, Kory, this is a really populist message, right? And,
sure. And it's a message. I mean, to go back to what we were talking about last week, you could never imagine Brian Mulroney or Michael Wilson giving this speech.
You could imagine perhaps Stephen Harper giving that at times, but not the Mulroney-Wilson government for sure. And I think it draws contrast with some of what you're seeing. And I know we're not here to talk policy, but no amount of low taxes and competitive regulatory environment is going to get a single auto plant built in this country when you're competing against the United States with the Inflation Reduction Act and offering huge subsidies, because I'm sure even Poilievre would agree that in the marketplace, competitiveness matters, and you've got the United States government distorting markets in a massive way, and you got to decide whether you want to have any jobs here or not. So, I think there's a potential path for contrast with the Liberals that could be very helpful for them in places like southwestern Ontario. I don't think the same dynamic exists around the resource sector, which is what he is actually talking about in those clips. No amount of incentives or better, more competitive environment is going to move ore deposits from one side of the border to the other. So on resource stuff, really, why aren't we doing more? Like the single most popular policy that we test regularly in Ontario is the Ring of Fire. It is the single most popular, large project going on in the province when you actually ask the public about it. Why is that not being developed? Well, I hear the provincial government talk about it all the time. I never hear the federal government talk about it, never. And I'm perplexed as to why. But look, I agree, populist message. I think it's a worker-focused message. I think it kicks some big corporations, and nobody's having a love affair with them right now, given cost of living pressures, et cetera. Like probably the biggest corporate demon in Canada right now is Galen Weston, and taking some shots at those folks, I think protects their flank and is popular.
Every day, Canada's 19 nuclear reactors reliably generate 15% of Canada's electricity, all without emitting any greenhouse gases. In fact, nuclear power is Canada's second largest source of GHG-free electricity. In Ontario, nuclear power plays an even bigger role, with over half of its electricity coming from nuclear. And when you dig deeper, looking at the entire life cycle and factoring in activities like plant operations and mining, nuclear power is the lowest carbon-intensive source of electricity generation per megawatt hour of electricity generated. Today's podcast sponsor, Bruce Power, is one of the world's largest nuclear generating facilities, located in Tiverton, Ontario, and responsible for avoiding about 19 million tons of greenhouse gases a year. While the company produces large volumes of emissions-free electricity critical to Ontario staying off coal, as well as continue system reliability, in 2021, Bruce Power became the first nuclear operator in North America to commit to achieving net zero greenhouse gases from site operations by 2027. That means it minimizes and offsets emissions from routine undertakings such as vehicles, machinery, buildings, and equipment to get to net zero status by 2027. And with investments being made to increase the electricity output from the Bruce Power site, which would further displace GHG emissions from Ontario's electricity sector, Bruce Power worked collaboratively to create the first carbon offset protocol for nuclear generation to help industries reach their own net zero goals. So what does it all add up to? By increasing the amount of clean energy it produces, Bruce Power is helping to decarbonize the economy and meet the increasing demand for electricity as more businesses and consumers turn to electrification. Jordan, his attack here is on the Liberals and their cozy relationship with business, but it's a bullet that's aimed at your voters.
Sure is. And I have to say, I have so many feelings about this speech. And like my first one is just intense jealousy, right? That he managed to pull off this narrative and deliver it. And like, it's good. Like it's really rich stuff, right? And then next followed closely by that is admiration for the just absolute shamelessness with which he's able to make these arguments when it is so, of course, divorced from the reality of the actual operations of the Conservative Party, his own voting record, and really everything we know about all of those things. I mean, I think like the Galen Weston example is so on point because it takes a lot of messaging confidence to go out and make this argument about standing up to corporate elites when like just 2 months ago, you had your chief of staff dragged into a little story for lobby, because their firm lobbied for Loblaws. I'm not arguing the case on that, but I'm just saying like that is the kind of thing where if you had more cautious communications advice, you might be told to steer clear of that. Or you might be told to steer clear when over half your party board is made up of lobbyists, or when your top donors are all, are overwhelmingly like rich real estate REITs and things like that. So I think that this rhetoric doesn't really bear a lot of connection to reality in terms of who is actually influential in the Conservative Party, who are his donors, who is shaping his policies. But it is something that he's going out there and he's delivering it. He's delivering it in a really, really compelling way. And I think that unless you have someone taking a run at that, and I say this goes out to both the Liberals and the NDP, and I'll talk more about it in my Hey You, then he gets a free ride here. But there's a big case to be made that his own personal record and all the facts surrounding him are absolutely to the contrary of this rhetoric. And then the last thing I'm going to rant about just on this topic is I had such a good chuckle that this was going out particularly to resource companies around project development the very same week that we're seeing Danielle Smith in Alberta layer on crap loads of new red tape for one type of resource she's just not a big fan of. So, we're all vote Conservative. You'll get lots of good, fast development unless the development you want to do happens to be renewable energy, in which case we're going to send you back to the Stone Age. So there is absolutely a different story, a counter narrative, some punchy stuff you could do with this. But I despair a little bit that no one seems to be throwing any of those punches back.
Hey, Scott, how did the Liberal Party become the party of big business?
Yeah, well, it sat there and let itself get painted according to somebody else's numbers, and that's the challenge, right? If you don't define yourself, then others will define you. And I think there's, Kory talked about, this is, with some of the strands of this. I think there's three distinct things here that he's putting together, which makes it really interesting from a political standpoint, and even from almost from a historical standpoint. There's the classic neoconservative, what was called neoconservatism at least, or the Thatcherism, the Reagan. You hear all that, which he's always carried in his briefcase, just as he did to grade 7 geography. I'm sure he was the guy who was in wingtips carrying his briefcase to class, and others were like, wait till we get that prick behind the portable. But all that kind of,
That was me too, by the way, just for clarification. But yeah.
Just had his Ayn Rand tucked in his lapel.
Michael J. Fox.
Alex B. Keaton. That's right. Yeah.
Exactly. So you hear that, right, in his rhetoric when it touches on, let's let the state get out of the way and individual industry and good old fashioned hard work and so on and so forth. Then you get the populist strain, obviously, the anti-corporate, let's, fuck those guys and their fat cat vested interests and their corporate lobbyists. And so you get that, which is a classic populist rant, and it could come from the left or in some instances it's come from the right. And then you get the modern distillation of populism, the us and them with a partisan dimension, right? Where it's like, I hope those motherfuckers don't come looking for anything from my government. And it's the liberals they're cozying up to. And so there's that partisan dimension to it. I think when you put those three things together, they're very powerful rhetorically, like very powerful. And, the benefit of it is that as he weaves this stuff together, different people hear different things. And so you can pluck out of it what you like from the message because, of course, so many people are beginning from a dissatisfied place. So if you're a lunch bucket, classic, ought to be an NDPer kind of folk, well, then you're hearing the fuck the corporate guys and there won't be any big breaks for those folks and all that. And if you're a classic, conservative, well, then you can hear that sort of, that small state sort of, let's get back to that stuff. And then if you're, Lorraine Bobbert, then you get to hear, the whole let's burn all the liberals on a stake kind of stuff. The problem is that it's incoherent. Like, it may work well politically. It is a prescription for a disaster once he gets into government. I think he keeps laying, I
presume they'll cross that bridge.
He'll cross that bridge, all this stuff. So, I do think it's going to make his time as prime minister absolutely incoherent. And he will have instructed people to light their torches and storm the castle. And then when he occupies the castle, I think he's going to have a hard time getting people to lay down their torches. And it's going to be interesting to watch that. But again, that's a problem for another day. I'm going to
jump in and say, Corporate Canada, I think there's a statute of limitations on his invitation to fight the government to protect your workers. I think that expires when he becomes prime minister. My sense is that he's not going to welcome your interventions at that point. But anyway, Scott, finish up.
Well, the thing I was going to say is politically, the way you have to attack it is to pull on the strands. If what's appealing about it is that people are hearing some things and ignoring other aspects of the message, then politically what you've got to do is go and pull on some of those strands and say, understand what he's saying here is you are on your fucking own. And we don't care if we don't care if corporate Canada is left on its own, but it means that individual families are going to be left on their own. So you pull on that piece. And and then you show the hypocrisy, which is where I think the real political vulnerability is, that it's easy for him instead of a microphone to say that he hates all corporate lobbyists and corporations. And then you look at, as Jordan says, where so much of the fuel in his F-150 is coming from. And I think you can pound on that. But you're going to have to make those arguments, right? It's a concoction that's powerful and interesting, even if it's a total bathtub full of bullshit.
We may not realize it, but the vast expansion of laser technologies in the last 40 years has revolutionized our entire world. Used for far more things than cutting up secret agents in evil lairs, today's extraordinarily precise and powerful lasers have changed industries from manufacturing to healthcare, right down to the cutting of tiny glass parts in your cell phone. This revolution has been built on the world-leading work of Donna Strickland at the University of Waterloo. Since 1985, her research on chirped pulse amplification has paved the way for far smaller and more powerful lasers than had ever been possible before. It's helped restore vision through countless laser eye surgeries and was recognized when she received the Nobel Prize for Physics in 2018. Investing in research now can lead to technology breakthroughs tomorrow. That's why U15 Canada is a proud member of the Coalition for Canadian Research. The Coalition is urging the federal government to support science and talented Canadian researchers with new funding in this budget. We have to support Canadian ambition, full stop. Visit researchcoalition.ca to learn more. Okay, so I hear what you're saying, but I'm going to challenge you and Jordan right now. Kory, just sort of, you can jump in if you want, but this is primarily a challenge to Scott and Jordan, which is he's not giving his opponents much to work with. Like if somebody says to you right now, what's the scariest thing Pierre Poilievre will do if he wins? What's your answer?
I think
the answer is, sorry, go ahead, Jordan.
Sorry. Yeah, well, I mean, like at the risk of reiterating, but I think it's you have to go after in whose interest he's working. You have to build that case, and you have to suggest that he is going to go after and cut the supports that families in Canada are relying on. That is the vulnerability. That's the flank that they've left open, and you have to make that case. And I do think that like this speech is very interesting. It's interesting because of all the threads that Scott has pointed to that he's trying to pull together here. It's interesting also because of the comms risks that he's taking in doing this. Like think of the audience he chose, right? He's going and basically saying like fuck you to a big corporate audience. Like he is getting attention. They are in a space where they can afford to take these risks and to do that. And I think you really have to go after, you have to tell the story of who's pulling the strings within the party. You have to tell the story of who Pierre Poilievre is, that he didn't just appear 2 years ago. He didn't drop down from space. This guy's got a record. And then you have to point it squarely at the stuff that Canadians like and count on. And I think that's all you can do. But the problem, of course, right now is that there's certainly no paid argument being made like that, and there's no disciplined, coherent, repetitive story being told that is actually making that stick in Canadians' minds. So it's a weak counter push right now.
Where I think the NDP have had their best days in the last year and a half or so have been when they've been going after grocery prices and Loblaw and the rest. And I think this is Poilievre inoculating himself against those sorts of attacks, or eating the lunch of the NDP in those areas, preventing them from having another narrative where they are perhaps better able to grow. And so I think it is cutting off that avenue as much as anything. I do think there is some genuine frustration though that he's expressing, especially to resource companies, around the lack of a coherent message or willingness to engage on what has been a very anti-resource set of government policies, starting with the carbon tax, but going on from there. Like basically, it's difficult to imagine any new large projects getting approved under the current regime. And I think there's a reality there, and I think there's a frustration that's real as well that these guys have basically rolled over and said and done nothing. So I think it's not just politics. I think there's some genuine frustration.
Taking up your challenge, David, I would say a couple things. How would you try to counter this? And well, first, let's start with your proposition that Poilievre has made it very, very hard for his opponents to counter, and you're correct. And that's where the answer lies. The reason that he's made it very difficult is that he has, I think, shrewdly, and some people sit and kind of, argue about this and howl about it, but it gets you nowhere. He has shrewdly avoided specific commitments, and that consequently has made him less vulnerable to the specific counter. So I think specificity is part of the answer. If you're going to go after it, you're like, oh, I see. He's opponent of corporate Canada. He's the guy he's Mr. Big Balls, who's going to tell them how to handle themselves. Well, here's a picture, here's a picture, here's a picture, here's a story, here's a story, here's a story. So you can try that kind of stuff. The same thing with respect to, consequences. You're going to have to point to specific things that he will not do, or that he will undo, and get him to deny that or get him to respond to that. And all of that all of that is very hard for all the reasons that Jordan said, which is that you're not doing it through paid media. So you bring 3 minutes, and we've seen little bits and pieces of this kind of effort. You take 3 ministers and you put them out in front of a microphone at 2:30 in the afternoon or 3:15 after question period, and they slam away on something like this. And it just kind of drifts. It's written smoke. It kind of blows away because how much of that gets reported? And if it does get reported, how many people see it? And if it does get seen, how many people believe it? And if it does get believed, how many people repeat it? Like, it's just such an uphill battle. But specificity, I think, is the only possible way to respond on that stuff. You got to try to pin the motherfucker down.
And I think it also can't be choose your own adventure, right, for the government. It can't be every minister's office determining what opposition stance and examples and narrative they're going to use. Like you have to control that centrally, and you have to repeat it until you're blue in the face, and then repeat it some more. And that's also something that hasn't happened yet.
Well, I know it's repetitive for folks, but like all of this is all well and good and interesting, and like there's some things that you guys mentioned that I would agree with, but none of it is going anywhere as long as they're doing a carbon tax. Like that is the biggest issue out there in the land. It is a choice that the government has made. It is incredibly unpopular. It's, substantively bad in terms of cost of living pressures on regular people. And as long as that's around, nobody's talking about the fucking lunch program. It is just too small ball compared to, the reality of a carbon tax. Like, so I think all of it is, people's ears are closed until they deal with that, and they're not going to deal with it. So, it'll be.
I tend to agree with you, Kory, that you can't be the solution to the affordability problem while you are perceived to be part of the problem of the affordability.
Well, not just perceived, like substantively, absolutely part of the problem. Like, they are fucking raising taxes. They are about to raise taxes.
Maybe that's the answer. If the carbon tax is the problem, they've already successfly rebranded the carbon tax.
Oh, yeah, right. It's been very successful.
So let's rebrand the carbon tax. Why stop at the rebate? Let's start calling the carbon tax gelato. Fucking people love gelato, right?
Yeah,
and there are kinds you can get sherbet, and sorbet.
Why don't we take a page from Biden and call it the Inflation Reduction Tax?
There you go. But listen, right? I don't want to be devil's advocate here, because I do not think the government should be defending the carbon tax. I think it's at this point, it's quite indefensible politically because of their own mishandling of it. But it's also really interesting to note that they really haven't even fucking tried, right? Like there's been no effort really to try to actually contain that issue.
Heating oil when their Atlantic caucus blew up, and that sure went like a charm.
Well, they're admitting, and this is the suicidal nature of what they did with the home heating fuel stuff. They admitted it's a problem and it's inflationary and it's screwing people over. It's just hey, unless you're these people over here, we don't give a fuck. Like, it's the worst of all worlds. I think that there was this
wishful thinking that there are still people who think that this can be contained to Atlantic Canada, and of course the knock-on effects are showing that that's absolutely wrong. But there's been no action to try to put an end to the story. It just keeps unraveling and unraveling.
I was very pleased to see that in the latest seat projections in Quebec that Stephen Guilbeault, the great white hope of the Liberal Party in Quebec, is poised to lose his own seat. The justice of that is just priceless for me.
If people think we're repetitive on the challenges of the carbon tax, the failure to employ paid media, and how despairing it is for the Liberals, they must truly think we're repetitive when it comes to Kory kicking the fucking snot out of Stephen Guilbeault every episode.
Okay, the NDP will be absolutely happy to be there to pick up the bill in the race.
Everyone needs a hobby, Scott, and you've just identified mine.
All right, let's stop kicking this horse. So I just want to say, by the way, as a shout out to Poilievre and to Jenny Byrne and to the whole group of them, they are running an unorthodox campaign. Like, this is not in a playbook. They have invented this, and it's working. And it's not what anybody would have recommended that they do. It's not what people were advising, how conservatives were going to get to majority government territory. Everybody, including myself, thought that had to go down a different path. But they have seen something out there, and they are building around it, and it's impressive.
That speech and the risks inherent to it are terrifyingly effective and interesting. That's why it captured my attention so much. I asked that we suggest. It really stood out to me.
Would agree.
Canada was founded back when fire trucks ran on literal horsepower. Road maintenance meant cleaning up after those horses, and pipes were for smoking, not infrastructure. Life has changed a lot since then, but the model for how we fund our Canadian communities has not. Relying solely on local taxpayers to bridge municipal deficits isn't fair or sustainable for any of us. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities is asking the federal government to keep funding for communities direct and predictable. And that starts with renewing the Canada Community Building Fund, the CCBF. It's a critical federal infrastructure program. It's the only program local governments can rely on to fix existing infrastructure and develop the new assets we need to help our communities grow. Municipalities of all sizes use the CCBF as a stable source of funding to provide the services Canadians rely on: water, roads, public transit, and so much more. It's time to renew and maintain the Canada Community Building Fund as a vital lifeline for local infrastructure and quality of life in a modern Canada. All right, so our last segment relates to our friend David Coletto and Abacus Data that picked up on a question that was thrown out on this podcast a few weeks ago about, Jesus, do people see any difference between the Liberals and the NDP anymore? And if they do, what kind of difference do they see? And basically what it looked like was that, is that most people thought there was some difference, but not a lot of difference, or the plurality response was not a lot of difference between the two parties, but some difference. When I looked through the whole data set, it made me more optimistic that the Liberals had room to squeeze NDP votes in the right circumstances than it did make me think that there was much opportunity for the Liberals to steal votes from the Conservatives, because the polarization between the Conservative vote and the vote of the other two parties seemed really, really stark. Jordan, what did you see in there?
Yeah, I think maybe not dissimilar to you, and also just a shout out to David. I'm going to loudly wish for more and different polling frequently on the podcast. This was it was cool. So I think, it's interesting to dive into the numbers a little bit. So obviously that the Conservative voter doesn't see much of a difference between the Liberals and NDP. That's not really very surprising. I think that's a bit of a chicken and an egg thing in a change election. So I don't think that there's much surprise there. But what I saw, and maybe it's the flip side of the coin of what you saw, David, depending on our perspective, I was interested that so let's say 1 in 5 Canadians that are parked with the NDP and have been there, pretty steadily since the last election, that half see a big difference between the Liberals and the NDP. And I actually think it's interesting because that vote has been very sticky despite 2 years of Poilievre being a really strong front runner. And, he's within progressives, within the left. He's a very, very polarizing and to some a pretty scary figure. So it's interesting to me that vote is sticky, and that despite the confidence and supply agreement, you still see New Democrat supporters viewing a really strong difference between the two parties. So I think that that's interesting because to me, it suggests that maybe you're not going to necessarily see Singh punished by NDP supporters for the confidence and supply agreement in the way that some have suggested he might be. But I think you're right. This really points to the fact that promiscuity on the left, maybe in all senses, not the fun sense, but in the political sense, is definitely going to be in play in the next campaign. And so that can work, as you've talked about, in terms of pressuring NDP voters over to the Liberals, but it can also work the other way around. It can also push Liberals to the NDP if popular vote falls to the right level and in the right circumstances. So I think that was something that I really took away from that, is that potential exists for sure. And then the other thing that I thought was really interesting is just casting forward after the next election, I do think that these numbers suggest to me that there will be strong pressure in the event of a conservative minority government for a coalition. There will be a lot of voters out there who believe that the differences between the Liberals and the NDP are small enough that there should be more continued cooperation, potentially extending even into a coalition. And so I think that that's really interesting. And that I think that that's probably something that I think that might be something the Conservatives are thinking about as well, which is why I actually don't think you're going to see their fighting stance stop at all after the campaign.
Kory, she's right. She's right. There's no, well, sure, Scott, jump in. I was going to say there's nothing in the data that changes my mind that we are drifting toward a two-party system where it's not clear what the configuration of the party on the left is, but that the Liberal Party is not triangulating the other two parties anymore, but it has moved into an ideological position similar to the NDP. Go ahead, Scott.
Well, it's exactly. Hang on, let me just go, Kory, because I want to.
Yeah, go for it.
This is exactly where I was at. I don't think it's as circumstantial as Jordan, and I think that the number one thing I take away about this isn't so much about the coming election. It's about what happens afterwards, David. And I think that you and I are going to have to go put on our Civil War swords and strap on our boots again, because I think what's going to occur is that there's going to be an almost irresistible demand, and particularly if there is a majority Conservative government, for not just a coalition but a complete melding of the parties. And here's what alarms me in particular. This is the stat that I pulled out of David's work, and like you guys, I thank him for doing it and being so responsive. 30% of Liberals say they see a big difference between Liberals and NDP. 30%. Barely a third, not even a third, right? Just a little under a third. 54%, more than half are willing to volunteer. They see hardly any difference. 54% see hardly any difference. And I think that tells you that there will be a lot of comfort with proposals a la Chrétien and Broadbent in 2011 to merge the two parties. So I think there's going to be a post-election, presuming unless the Liberals somehow resurrect themselves and get reelected, I think there's going to be massive pressure for a merger. I think most of the opposition feels like it might well come from the NDP and old loud Liberals like you and I, David. And I think that's a coming war. And and there's lots of reasons it's moved this way, but these numbers tell me that it's moving that way in a hard fashion. And post-election, assuming a Liberal loss, there's going to be a big fight on that side of the political spectrum. And the voices of merger who have had trouble getting traction in the past are going to have a lot to work with. And guys like you and I, David, are going to find ourselves having to really battle.
Yeah, and so little differentiation on economic policy. I mean, in a lot of respects, Chrétien, Andrew, Bevan hold the brand in their hands right now.
Yeah.
Kory?
Yeah, I didn't see anything terribly surprising in the numbers. I think it's everything that you guys just pointed out. I think there's probably a bit worse news there for the NDP than than we've articulated. Like basically, there's 10% of people who are solidly with the NDP, like 10% of the public, and like basically half of their votes are up for grabs. But still, together, I don't think it's I think the case for some sort of merger on the left is very has a lot of potential for all the reasons you guys stated. Why is that? Well, the NDP are propping up the government, and they are holding hands more than they are in fisticuffs with one another, and so progressive voters at some point are going to get frustrated with the situation and want to come together. And what this says to me is there's a pretty sizable market for it within both parties. That said, this didn't look at the Greens, but there's really three parties on the progressive left in Canada right now fighting over, 60% of the voters, a little less than that, 55% of the voters.
Four if you include the Bloc.
Four if you, right.
We got the progressive.
So, but this is the consequence of, I think, Kathleen Wynne and Justin Trudeau, like the Paul Martin, Chrétien, Turner, like that version of the Liberal Party has not been present in front of Canadians for a very long time. Like, I think it's fair to say that there aren't a lot of conservative Liberal switchers anymore because the Liberal Party has moved from the center to the left in a lot of important markets now for a couple of decades. And the consequence of that is more differentiation between conservatives and liberals and fewer switchers between those two parties. So I think that's just a natural consequence of that situation.
Now, Bonnie Crombie can be a counterweight to that in a big market, right? Bonnie Crombie can drag the brand back to the center in Ontario.
Think so, but I'll point out again that she's polling even worse than Trudeau is in the province of Ontario. And despite having a carbon tax be present in the market since 2019, so 5 years, she can't formulate an opinion as to whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Well, the population has formulated their opinion on whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, and it's clearly not a good thing. So, I guess there's potential to that, but there's potential that I could be named Pope. It's just very fucking unlikely to occur.
Well, not with an
really, because
like that.
I have not got a response to my letter of recommendation yet, and from the Cardinals, so I don't know that it's a closed issue.
Well, I think it's increasingly closed, and we'll get to this in my Hey You, but I don't know. There's a multi-million-dollar ad campaign that's drawing that contrast pretty clearly in the market, and the response will be. To those heavy cannons pounding away on the issue will be a spitball from a hollowed-out Bic pen.
Well, there you go. Scott, do you got anything last to say on this abacus poll, or should we move to the Hey Yous?
Well, we can move to the Hey Yous. I need 2 minutes to tell you guys a story that involves Kory before the end of the pod.
Well, why not do it now?
All right. So here's the other thing. The other day I go into the bar to pick up some wings and fries for the boys. And just sit there for 4 hours and drink beer and cry. And guy says, "Hey, are you Scott Reid?" I'm like, "Yeah." I hate it when people say that, right? Are you Scott Reid? And I'm like, "Fuck, what's coming next?" Right? Like, and so sure enough, he says, he goes, "Yeah, listen, I listen to you on that podcast, Herle's podcast." He goes, "I just want you to know, every time you talk, I want to gag." And I'm like, "Well, thanks for taking the time out of your day to let me know that." And he goes, "But I fucking love Kory. I love Kory, and I love the way he dresses." This is what the guy says to me. He said it in more colorful language, by the way. He called me certain. Anyway, it didn't all square up. But
I think there's a deep homoeroticism to modern conservatism. I really do.
Yeah. I mean, I got to say, this gives me great hope for dignity resonating with working people. So that's what I'm taking away from this.
This guy definitely wove the theme of male sexuality into the conversation.
Well, there you go.
Kory does not know what to say. Speechless for a change. All right.
He's turned from shiny white diamond to red ruby at this point.
Yeah, there you go.
Maybe Gordon Pinson can bring some decorum back to these proceedings.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
All right, Jordan.
Well, my Hey You this week is following up on Poilievre's speech, and it is going out to all of my friends in the Canadian labor movement. So this is your moment to get together and to stick together, because this campaign is going to be like no other in terms of how appeals are going to be made to try to divide the labor movement in Canada. And it's no secret, friends. I hope you're tuning into this podcast because Kory talks about it here every week. So there is going to be absolutely a push that is underway already to peel off the private sector unions, just the way Doug Ford successfully did in Ontario. And it's really dangerous. And unlike in Ontario, I would say, you actually have really good and important grounds to resist that at the federal level. You need to go out and have a conversation and remind people that Pierre Poilievre is the same guy who just almost 10 years ago was out there proudly saying that he was going to bring right to work to Canada. Not only is Poilievre a stereotypical conservative in terms of his attitudes about labor, he's actually worse. He wanted to be the cutting edge of anti-labor movement in Canada. Please do not let this guy cosplay as a worker. Do not let him do that. Do not let him divide you, for the love of God and everything that is holy, okay? And listen, the last thing that I want to say about this is that you can also look and see how this worked out in Ontario. If you allow yourselves to be divided, this will mean attacks on private sector unions, and they will not stop there, okay? So there will be big overreach. There will be big, dangerous attempts to weaken labor. And you have got to stop it in its tracks. You cannot allow yourselves to be divided that way. So I know that Labor is trying to figure out what to do ahead of the next campaign and to think through what the pieces are here. And it is really about going back to the core principle, and that is fucking solidarity. So please have it. That's my hey you.
Jordan brings it with receipts. All right.
Cosplay as a worker. He shows up with a tool belt, but his hands smell like cologne. Be warned.
Scott?
My hey you goes to the federal Conservative Party. Jamel Jabani, smashing victory in Durham, big, and now we get newspaper articles, liberals pissing their pants, going, "What did he win? We didn't think he win that big." And then what's this mean? No, it's all that kind of stuff. But it also took him exactly 40 seconds to go into an angry rant, which included provincial Conservative cousins. And Doug Ford comes back out and sort of takes a little shot at him. And I'm not actually warning you about fissures between yourself and the provincial Conservative Party. I'll leave that to Kory, but I don't really think that's going to happen because I just think that victory is always in everybody's collective interest. And I don't think there'll be anything that gets in the way of that. But I'm telling you this, Jamel Jabani is going to be a problem for you guys. And he's going to be a problem for you. You know, he went to work for Bell Media, and then when he didn't like the way it went, he attacked them. He went to work for the provincial Conservatives, Doug Ford, and when he didn't like the way it went, he attacked him. Now he's got to work for you. Guess how I think this fucking story ends? He's going to be a challenge, and I think there's an interesting thing here in that a number of candidates, and now one of them, and because it's a by-election, ended up getting successfully elected. A number of candidates you managed to recruit have been under this banner of, fuck them all, we're not going to follow these rules, freedom, we don't need to be told what to do, kill the gatekeepers, except you guys are going to be gatekeepers. You're going to be gatekeepers of your own caucus. You're going to expect discipline and solidarity, and you're going to have a hard time extracting it from folks. So Jamel Jabani is a large canary, and you are in a coal mine.
Yeah, I don't know the guy, but he won a by-election to become a member of parliament, and he came out spraying bullets in every direction, like he was speaking on behalf of conservatism or something. I
might think that might be in his nature. Almost.
May you have much joy of him.
All right, Kory, you got a hey you?
Yeah, I do actually, and this sort of speaks. I mentioned advertising a bit earlier. I want to do my hey you to my good friend and brother-in-law Dennis Matthews and the team at Creative Currency. They have been absolutely killing it for us with the provincial Conservative Party in terms of the advertising that they've been putting out. We've got a new ad coming next week. I think they're doing some of the best work out there in this space, and really proud and happy to have them doing some of that with the campaign I'm associated with.
I will double the endorsement of creative currency for slightly different reasons and argue that not every single person's a card-carrying member of the conservative movement there.
That's right. That's right. There is a member of the Reid family who's over there as well. But David Tarrenton out in Atlantic, Canada as well. Lauren McDonald, Max, hugely talented group of folks there.
Killing it.
For sure, and great people. My hey you goes out to the people running the Liberal campaign. I think that you've been operating on the thesis that you needed to husband all the resources you could to run a fully funded campaign in the writ. And I think that you need to rethink that calibration a little bit, because I don't think you can run from now to the writ in this circumstance. So I think you're going to have to take the same gamble that you bravely took in 2015, when you spent at the beginning of the writ as if you were fully funded, even though you weren't, and you counted on the money to come in after to allow you to get to the end of the writ. I think you got to take a chance like that. It's important that you get the creative right, because it's, you can waste money on a negative campaign, but if you got the right content, spend the money now. I think it will pay off in the long run, and it's necessary. All right. There's our show for today. Thank you all three of you for being here. Kory for getting up early. He's in California. So So he got up early to do the show. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, as well as our sponsors, CN, Bruce Power, U15 Canada, and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. Thank all you accursed who watched or listened to the show today, and we'll be back next week with more of the Curse of Politics. Until then, take care of yourselves. See ya.